So welcome everyone to the fourth talk on mindfulness and anxiety. So we've been really exploring anxiety with a in a different way. It's kind of a new way of looking at anxiety and looking at anxiety habit loops and how we get caught in these habit loops that aren't rewarding, and if we look really closely we can see how they're not very rewarding. The results aren't positive. It just leads to more anxiety. We talked about one, stress, eating junk food as the behavior, the result being shame and anxiety, more stress, more anxiety. We talked about one which was big to-do list, lots to do, work related. One behavior was procrastination. Another behavior was to work beyond our limits. Result, anxiety. And I came across another one that we actually haven't discussed in the group, but some kind of interpersonal stress. An event with another person, and then a lot of worry about that event, and the result is anxiety. And we talked about how the bigger and better offer is, we can see that we don't get anything out of, we ask ourselves, well, what do I get out of the existing habit loops? We see that it's just more anxiety, and we realize that we can substitute a different behavior and get a different result. So you could substitute curiosity or mindfulness or compassion, kindness as a substitute behavior. So that's what we've been exploring for the last 3 sessions. And those 3 talks are all on the website, payattention.ca, if you want to review that, because we go through it pretty quick, and this is really perhaps a process that we can engage in over weeks, if not months, right? To continually see our habit loops. I'm noticing more and more subtler ones as I practice with this. I mentioned last week just the mere habit loop of the mind going to thought when there's a space is a habit loop that creates some kind of unease, a sense of unsatisfactoriness or unease. And I notice that as a habit loop. And so when I notice, there's that habit loop, I can bring curiosity to the mind engaging in this behavior, rather than it just happening on kind of an autopilot mode. And practicing with this over the week has kind of really left me with some deeper stillness in my days. So as we've been going in this, and this question came up last week, and it comes up every time I do courses on anxiety or trauma, is, well, how do I relate when the anxiety is very intense, right? And this came up last week, and I'll talk in more depth today. How do I relate to it and practice mindfulness or the Dharma with this kind of intense or overwhelming anxiety? So in this talk, I want to kind of define what I'm talking about when I say anxiety, and I'll try to go through that quickly because it can get a little academic, compared to kind of what anxiety disorders might be, and then look at 2 ways that we can relate to intense anxiety with some kind of more practical suggestions, as well as just the practice that we're always doing. We'll talk about how that fits into this. So I want to start just by saying that having anxiety that's sporadic, even panic attacks that are sporadic, is a normal part of life. So people think, oh, I'm feeling anxious. I shouldn't feel anxious. Well, it's this part of being human. It's actually the first noble truth. It's this being human has suffering attached to it, and anxiety and even panic attacks are very normal part of being human. So I want to get past this idea that sometimes anxiety is overwhelming because we think we shouldn't be experiencing it, right? Think about that. Like if you have some deep anxiety or even panic, which is about as deep as it gets, right? You get the hyperventilating and all the symptoms of panic. If you can say, oh, this is part of being human. All humans experience this. It's at some point in their lives. It's a normal part of life. It can that can shift how we relate to what's arising. And I hope you can see that. It's basically how I always, when I offer the Four Noble Truths, how I always say the first noble truth all by itself is life-changing, transforming. You don't even have to get to the second, the third. Just the first noble truth, just recognizing that this is a normal part of life can be so transformative. So at some point in our life, we will experience overwhelming anxiety, right? And it can be a result of all kinds of things. The why isn't particularly important. In fact, one of my mantras is why doesn't matter. It's just sensing into the experience of it. But I mean, it can be based on past trauma. It can be based on a kind of a buildup of stress. We see this with the pandemic, that it's just a buildup of, am I going to be safe? Are my loved ones going to be safe? And this it's a kind of a peaking of this stress builds up, and it can build up into a state of anxiety or panic, worrying about a physical or illness. It could be genetics, and so on. There's many possible explanations. People that experience anxiety frequently, for example, on a daily basis or even a weekly basis, may have what is called an anxiety disorder. Is defined by the Diagnostic Statistical Manual that psychologists and psychiatrists use, the DSM as it's called. And there's many different anxiety-related disorders, and I won't go into all those that are in the DSM. And you've got the causes and the symptoms in there, and if you leaf through this, it's a big, thick book. If you leaf through that, and you'll definitely be able to find a disorder for yourself in there, right? There's just so many, and I say that half tongue in cheek, but I really think that there are so many now. It's grown. That manual has grown so much that there's pretty much something in there for everybody. One that's common is a generalized anxiety disorder, or GAD, which is persistent worry and anxiety that interferes with daily life. So there's a key variable I think is worth noting. If it's interfering with daily life, then it could be classified as something that you need to get other help with, perhaps some individual attention with a therapist. So if it's interfering with your daily life, it's weekly, there's daily, it's very frequently, it's perhaps worth exploring this through other avenues. So when we relate to anxiety, the same way when we talked about relating to trauma, is to titrate your experience with it. So to go gradual. opening and engaging with it. So that's why I'm going to kind of give you two ways of relating to intense anxiety or panic attacks. So, for example, you can hold a panic attack in mindfulness and watch it pass. In fact, you might see that it affects your life very little if you just allow it to flow through. And the only way to allow it to flow through is say, okay, here it is. This is natural. It's part of being human. It's a normal part of life. This is what it feels like in the body. And this is, and it's flowing through. It's not permanent. It's going to arise and it's going to dissolve. So that's one way of relating to this. And noticing how anything you add to it can intensify it. Any stories about, why am I experiencing this, and jumping into the prefrontal cortex to figure out why can intensify it. How can I avoid this? So coming up again, engaging the prefrontal cortex to come up with strategies to avoid panic attacks is a common loop that we get into. Right? And then you think you figured out what it is that caused it. So now you got to go through your life trying to avoid that event. Right? So if driving caused it, now you've got to avoid driving, or if whatever it might be, you've got to avoid some kind of event. So we can intensify it that way. So you can see how what the Buddha called papancha, the mind, and I like to think of papancha as the prefrontal cortex getting involved and trying to figure it out, and that just creates more and more difficulty for us. So we're just holding it in mindfulness and feeling in the felt sense of it in this practice, not worrying about having another panic attack or intense anxiety or the consequences, just relating to it as it is. And so you can actually see the habit loops that create intense anxiety or panic attacks. Right? You can see that there's a habit loop, and often it's the engagement with the worrying mind, problem-solving mind. Yeah. So when you're feeling into this in the body, there's all kinds of they're actually symptoms. They would be called symptoms in the DSM, but a lot of them are felt bodily experiences. Restless, tense, right? You can feel that in the body. Sense of impending danger or panic, doom. You can feel that in the body. Increased heart rate. You can really feel that in the body. Breathing rapidly, even hyperventilating, can be felt in the body. Sweating and trembling, again, experienced in the body. You get other symptoms. Worry, the mind jumping into papancha, can also be noticed. So the physical, as well as seeing the mind and what it does. Now, I mentioned that if you have this kind of persistent, frequent, and anxiety that interferes with your daily life, that you could, seek other therapies. And there's lots of mindfulness-based therapies that you could also seek out, such as mindfulness-based stress reduction, which I think most people in this group are probably familiar with by now, MBSR, and mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, or MBCT, or for where it's combined with depression, particularly depression that is relapsed. Dialectical behavior therapy, you might not have heard of that one. It's Marshall Linehan, which is a wonderful friend who developed that. Acceptance and commitment therapy, or ACT, is another. So there's quite a few different ones out there. If you have a particular problem and you'd like me to direct you towards a possible type of mindfulness-based intervention, you feel free to reach out to me. So the two ways to relate to intense anxiety. The first one, so the two of them are, and I'll go into them in some detail. The first one is distract but stay present, with the intention of putting it aside for another day. So all those words are important. Distract, but stay present, with the intention of putting it aside for another day. So it's not just mere distraction. So it's not like grabbing junk food, or, it's not or even a healthy distraction of grabbing healthy food, or whatever it might be. You're present while you're distracting, and you're with the intention of coming back to this. So it's overwhelming in this moment, but I will come back to this another day. And Jack Kornfield talks about this in his book, Path with a Heart, when he talks about persistent visitors and how to relate to persistent visitors. And I'm not sure he uses those exact words, but I remember reading that book many, many years ago. And when I read that book, that's what I got out of the book. That's what I'll always remember for the rest of my life, is Jack talking about how to relate to these persistent visitors. And I love that phrasing, persistent visitors. I also called them insistent visitors for a while. And it goes along with the poem Guest House, where you put out the welcome mat for everything that comes to visit, right? Including intense anxiety. If you take that Rumi poem, putting out the welcome mat for whatever visits. So distract but stay present. So to do this, there's kind of four kinds of aspects to this. You're aware, so you're present, so you're conscious with what's happening. So without this, you can't really do this practice. If you can retroactively go, okay, what just happened, and bring consciousness into what just happened. But to practice this of being conscious of what's arising in the moment is so very important. You're recognizing what is happening in the moment. You can see the wave starting to build, in other words, the wave of anxiety. And of course, when you see the wave of anxiety building, you can either surf the wave, which is the second way to engage with it, or you can distract yourself from the wave, go under, let the wave pass over, and then reemerge from it. But you're cognizant that there's a wave building, and so you recognize this is happening. You come to the present moment through the body or the breath. So I always like the notion of breathing into the lower belly. and I found this for myself, and I found it when I've worked with other people, is there's something grounding about breathing into the lower belly and bringing your awareness to the deepest part of your belly and sensing the breath in that place, and saying in on the in breath and out on the out breath. As you breathe into the lower belly, you say in, and as you breathe out from the lower belly, you say out. Like internally say it. I guess you could say it out loud if it feels appropriate. That would be fine. But it's keeping you grounded in the present moment. And then, the energy, the wave is perhaps still building. It may seem appropriate to now disperse this energy. And this is really, in a very important way. We talked about body shaking. You remember Peter Levine's shake, rattle, and roll? Remember, we practiced that when we did the trauma series, where we literally shook from our feet all the way up to our heads, and we just dispersed all that energy. So shake, rattle, and roll is an effective strategy. Playing fast music and just jumping around can displace a lot of energy. Physical exercise is a good energy displacer. Be going for a run. I think Jack Kornfield in his book talks about chopping wood. The book was written, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, but maybe people chopped more wood then. So that some kind of, physical activity that disperses the energy. And it's doing it with letting go of any comparing mind. What do I look like? I mean, you might not want to do shake, rattle, and roll in the middle of a board meeting at work. I don't know, depending on where you work, maybe it's okay, but so you have to think of appropriate ways, perhaps excusing yourself from the meeting and finding a way to disperse energy. And then as the wave starts to break, you reflect on what just happened. This is more of it's a contemplation, not a figuring out. You can actually just hold that question, what just happened, in awareness. So you're not trying to answer the question, you're just holding the question in awareness without trying to answer it. So you could even say, what is calling out to be known and felt right now? So I came across just recently a kind of meditation that I'll share with you. I came across it, I'm trying to think, less than a year ago, looking at a mindfulness for children program. So I'm really fascinated how you teach not like really little children how to be mindful, because you can't use all this jargon, right, that we use in these groups. I mean, you have to boil it right down to basics. So I always find when you're teaching just almost toddlers how to do mindfulness, it's very revealing. And so there's some effective strategies, I think, for all of us that are being shared. And then I also saw it in Judson Brewer's book. He picked it up as well. It's called the 5-finger breathing meditation. And it's quite effective, even for intense anxiety, but also any time of the day you want to just kind of be present, but in a way distracting yourself. So what you do is you start by placing your one hand up in front of you, or you can place it on the ground, and you spread your fingers apart, and you use the pointer finger of the opposite hand, and you trace your fingers. And as you trace up, you breathe in, You trace down, you breathe out. Breathe in and breathe out. You just go all the way through your hand, and then you can come back the other way to the start. So it's just, and I think that the reason this is effective is it's using all kinds of senses, right? It's bringing you back to your senses because you've got touch, you've got sight, you've got the mind involved. You've got every, well, not every sense, but you've got a lot of sense doors involved in that activity. So it's called the 5-finger breathing meditation. So give that a whirl in situations that seem appropriate, and I'd be curious to, because it is new in my kind of repertoire, how it works out for you. And be careful that you're not using it to try to make anxiety go away. You're still being present with what you're experiencing. You're not trying to force something to go away through using 5-finger or rain or any of these. Just like you can't force yourself to relax, you can't force yourself not to eat chocolate. And the study about the rebound effect, the two groups, one group was told to try to suppress the urge to eat chocolate. So a group of people that like to eat chocolate. One group was told to try and suppress the urge and to eat chocolate. And the other group was said, just go ahead and do what you normally do. The group that was trying to suppress the urge to eat chocolate ate more chocolate than the control group. And they called it the rebound effect in the study. Can't remember the scientists. It's in my notes from last week, but I did mention that last week. But it's worth reiterating it because we do think we can force ourselves to get out of these things rather than learn how to relate to what's a very natural human condition. So that's the first one: distract, but stay present with the intention of coming back. The second is to engage and investigate with curiosity. So this one, like I talked about at the beginning, you're bringing mindfulness to the entire experience. You're surfing the wave at this point. Remember, I used to give presentations, and I used to entitle them, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn to surf." And you can't stop the waves. You can't stop anxiety from arising, but you can learn to surf it. And of course, rain is a way to engage with intense anxiety. Recognize, accept, investigate, and can be whatever you want it to be, apparently. Nurture, note, or non-identify. I'm sure if you come up with another one, we can add it to the list. But yeah, so rain can be a helpful way of engaging and investigating with curiosity. So we're connecting with what's happening. And of course, when we connect with what's happening, we're connecting with the body in so many ways. And we can connect with the breath as a ground or an anchor. So we have to really learn to feel into our bodies. So that's those are the two ways. You can maybe know of a third way from your experience. It's a hybrid or other ways to engage, but from my practice, it's been to either distract in the but be present, or to actually just feel right into it and allow it. And for me, it's a game changer was to just sort of take the first noble truth in at a very deep level, that this is normal. This is part of being human. We can't stop it. We can just know it. Yeah. I'll open it up for any questions.